Yeah, man, 5170 to the world. Rap solo till I die, man. Black Steaze, your boy J. Urus on the beat. It's also a religion, that's what we say. Yeah. Been pushing in a spy all day, my boy. I say we corner store inspired.
What they will say is not something we don't know. People behave as though we don't know what happened. We know what happened. We know who killed Steve Biko. We know where they killed him. We know that they brain damaged him, and that during that interview on the 6th of September 1977. And then we also know how he suffered. We know how he could not speak. We know how he wetted him in the cell. We know how they drove him naked from Gqeberha to Tshwane. We know all those things. What we know also is that somebody refused and or protected the murderers.
I'd like to welcome you in to another eye-opening and informative episode of Burning the Mic with Steaze. Today, we'll be exploring the heritage and the history of Black consciousness through a man that I call one of my idols. Before we jump into that, please like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell in the corner, and also tell your friends about this. Well on our way to 100 subscribers. I hope if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and let us know what you think of our content. Born under the dust of Tarkastad, raised under the narrow lanes of Ginsburg. Many called him Bantu. He answered also to Stephen, but his mother named him in full Bantu Stephen Biko. His name meant the people, and from his first breath in 1946, he definitely belonged to the people. But you see, belonging under apartheid was definitely something like a death sentence. It was a wound that was stitched into our identity, a reminder to those who kneel, and a reminder to those who remain silent that they should do just that. Every time in a generation comes a person who's known as a black sheep, and Biko refused silence. He began not though with the guns. He began not by skipping the country and going to exile. He began with something he called the most powerful weapon that the oppressor has in their hands, and that's the mind of the oppressed.
We see a completely non-racial society. We don't believe, for instance, in the so-called guarantees for minority rights, because guaranteeing minority rights implies the recognition of portions of the community on a race basis. We believe that in our country there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people. And those people will have the same status before the law, and they will have the same political rights before the law. So in a sense, it will be a completely non-racial egalitarian society.
But will the vast number of blacks, after all their experiences, be able to live a life without giving vent to feelings of revenge, of
yes, we believe it is the duty of the vanguard political movement which brings about change to educate people's outlooks. I mean, in the same way that blacks have never lived in a socialist economic system, they've got to learn to live in one. In the same way that they've always lived in a racially divided society, they've got to learn to live in a non-racial society.
I'd like to transverse now back to a point of Ubutatu Bantu Biko's journey that begins in the University of the Natal, where he carried a stethoscope in one hand, but he also carried a notebook of rebellion in one hand. SASO, SASO, or the South African Students Organization, became his pulpit. And through SASO, he birthed a new lexicon, Black consciousness. I would like to read a quote, one that really has stuck with me over the years. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And so, Utatu Bantu Biko set about reclaiming that weapon. You see, many see Black consciousness as just a philosophy, but I view it as a therapy for the wounded people. It was a mirror that we can hold up to our faces and really see what our reflections look like. We are a nation that has been taught to hate our reflection, but once Bantu Biko had given us that mirror through Black consciousness, he taught ourselves how to love again. And from that love came Black dignity and Black pride, and definitely Black excellence. Bantu Biko's theory was not just one that lived in the academia world. It was tested in the streets. Community clinics were opened, literacy classes were taught in back rooms, and theater groups rehearsed plays that turned oppression into resistance. These were what we call Black community programs, built by hands that had nothing, yet gave everything. Students became builders, Nurses became organizers, and sermons given at church now became seminars of liberation. Self-reliance became the gospel, and we became the authors of our own freedom. To a regime that was obsessed with control, this was definitely contagious. Young people who were relentless, who were wounded through their past, however, still fiery and electric, were taking back their minds and in turn taking back their futures and ours as well. We move on to September 1977. Utatu Bantu Biko is arrested. In his company is Pastor Cyril Jones, as they have traveled back from the Cape, meeting other cadres and other people that they'd hoped to align with. However, they had unfortunately ran into a specific roadblock that was set up by the security branch unit. Many did not know whether that was a setup or it was just an untimely finding.
The day before we had arrived in Cape Town from King Williamstown, I had worked for the previous 3 months on setting up appointments with various persons, including Dr. Neville Alexander of the Unity Movement and some of our own comrades for a separate appointment. And on that day, the night of the 17th, we were going to see both parties. The appointment with Dr. Neville Alexander never happened. We had become very uneasy because we could not even reach our own comrades at the scheduled times and at the scheduled place. We became very uneasy and suspicious, and we just decided the next morning to leave Cape Town without warning to anybody and return to King Williamstown. And on the way, we were stopped at a roadblock in Grahamstown.
It is notarized that Utatu P.C. Jones was taken to Alcoa Park in terms of a police station, and Utatu Bantu Biko was taken to 9th Avenue, Walmer Police Station. On the 7th of September, he is interrogated, beaten, and allegedly his head is slammed against the wall. Doctors were called after the gruesome interrogation. They saw the swelling, they saw the confusion, and they saw the neurological signs, yet they did nothing.
When one talks about torture and murder in the Eastern Cape, how can one not think of Stephen Bantu Biko?
No evidence on his death at the hands of police interrogators in 1977 was heard at the Truth Commission this week because his widow, Ntsiki Biko, still prefers a criminal prosecution to the Truth Commission process. In his short lifetime, Steve Biko became known as the father of black consciousness.
Any changes which are to come can only come as a result of a program worked out by black people. And for black people to be able to work out a program, they need to defeat the one main element in politics which was working against them, and this was a psychological feeling of inferiority.
The history of the last decade of the struggle for liberation would probably have been different had he not died in 1977. On the 18th of August, Biko ignored his banning orders and drove to a political meeting. He was arrested at a roadblock and taken to the Sanlam building in Port Elizabeth. He was kept naked and in chains in room 619. Biko sustained serious head injuries during interrogation. In that state, and still naked, probably to humiliate him, he was taken by police van to Pretoria. Steve Biko died naked and on the metal grill on September 14, 1977. The Minister of Police, Jimmy Kruger, immediately told the world Biko had died after a hunger strike. He later changed that and explained that he had banged his head against a wall. He told an amused National Party Congress, "I am not glad and I am not sorry about Mr. Biko. It leaves me cold." The SABC and the Afrikaans press mounted a propaganda campaign to counter the widely held view that Biko was killed by his interrogators. After an inquest that became the laughing stock of the international judicial community, Magistrate Martinus Prins determined that nobody could be held responsible for Biko's death. But the inquest discredited the medical doctors who examined Biko, and it cast a dark shadow over his interrogators, Alfred Oosthuizen, Harold Snyman, Pieter Goosen, Paul Janse van Vuren, Henry Forshee, Ruben Marx, D.P. Siebert, Jacobus Beneke. 19 years later, Steve Biko's wife, sons and friends still demand to know which individuals killed one of South Africa's most talented sons and why they were left unpunished.
Naked, shackled, and concussed, he was left on a cold floor. On the 11th of September, they load him into a back of a Land Rover, and 1,100 kilometers later, they come to Pretoria. Chained, unconscious, and stripped of his clothes, and also as well as his dignity. On the 12th of September, a martyr leaves this world. The post-mortem continues to whisper the truth. Extensive brain damage, intravascular blood coagulation, acute kidney failure, and uremia. Somehow, the magistrate at the time clears the police, and the state clears the doctors. But the world, no. The people, no. And history will never clear them of this murder.
Your Honor, we have said that during the scuffle, he bumped his head against the wall.
Which was wrongful. That was in self-defense because this man had gone berserk on your story.
That is correct, and that is the course of events as we have described it. There had been a scuffle. He did bump his head against the wall.
From the very onset, everybody could hear what Snyman is saying. In fact, I think he's lying even more than he did in the inquest. So it doesn't change our attitude to the fact that we will oppose the amnesty.
We spent the entire first day, of course, hearing the first applicant, and I think you all will agree with me that it is very clear, and it is now very clear, the extent to which these people are prepared to continue lying. We are no closer to the truth. I don't think with the other people that are going to come forward and still testify that we will get anywhere.
In the years following the passing of Utatu Bantu Biko, AZAPO has continued to pick up the flame and extensively carry it, regardless of the challenges that have faced. Every September, they gather for Biko Week between the 6th and the 12th of September, and on the 12th, Biko Day, that is a day for mourning and remembering. And just like AZAPO, I have called us together today on this algorithm to remember that Black consciousness is not a chapter that was closed in 1977. It lives in today's struggles. It lives in today's classes that remain divided by poverty. It continues to live in the action and the fight that we carry against returning the land back to its people. But mostly, it lives in the youth. It lives in you and I, reflecting to actually see our worth.
Biko's teachings, had we heeded them, would have kept, if not completely diminished, our complacent adjustment to injustice, inferiority, poverty, and inequality. Our minds would have been freer. We would dwell not in a perfect place, because there is none, but a much better mentally liberated zone and a thriving egalitarian society of equals, where Black people don't see themselves through the eyes of those who don't like them. We would have lived in a country where no leader betrays us, hoping to sit at the edge of the table of the white master who gives them work and money. We would have lived in a thriving society where Black people walk tall, wearing their skin that is similar to that of Mother Earth. Their heads would not be down. They would not have to beg anyone. Had we listened to him and heeded his call, we would have lived in a country where leaders fear betraying their own. We would have lived in a country where injustice is not tolerated. I like talking about justice because we don't understand it.
In 2025, nearly 5 decades later, the state has now reopened an inquest into the murder of Utatu Bantu Biko. And this is a subtle reminder that the truth may be buried, but it never rots in shallow graves.
There was an inquest in the same year that Biko was killed in 1977. Obviously, that was under the apartheid government, which then found that there was nobody from the apartheid state side who was held criminally liable. Yeah. for his murder in detention, which was not a surprising outcome, right? And they attributed his death to, amongst others, brain injury, injury to the brain rather, and a number of other factors that they cited. But also remember, in 1996, the Biko family, the Mklenga family, the Ribeiro family, and the Zanyan People's Organization made an application to the Constitutional Court, right, to also exact justice for the murder of Biko. So that was the second time. So the third time is the conversation we are having now, the recent decision of the NPA. So that history is particularly important. Now, one of the reasons why I suspect there's been such a delay after 1994 has to do with the fact that there is an outstanding matter of over 300 cases that were recommended for prosecution by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as you would recall, the Biko family and about 20 other families at the beginning of this year, this thing lodged a case, with the court for these cases that have not been prosecuted. So it comes in the context recently of the over 300 cases that were not pursued for criminal prosecution by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that is a matter that is now before court to establish as to why those cases were not pursued. And it would be interesting to see what that what that case reveals, so as to what the reasons were, because this is after 1994 and there was an expectation that a government in the democratic era would pursue that. So that is one of the factors that would have led to context, that we forget the historical and political context that informs what happens in the courts. So for instance, we must locate the issue of Steve Biko's case, the Craddock 4, the cases of Noctulas Melane, the Kosas 4, the Ribeiro, the Mklenga, all of those cases, we must locate them in the context of what is referred to as the crimes of colonialism, right? So they are not just simply issues of legality and courts and court rulings. They are the crimes of colonialism. And I'm raising this to help us understand that globally, the crimes of colonialism generally go unpunished.
Bantu Biko's death was meant to castrate our pride. It was meant to castrate our courage and our effort towards liberating ourselves. However, it planted a seed. Black consciousness was never about one man. It was and still continues to be a program to rebuild the South from within, a program to rebuild the community from within, and a program to rebuild its people from within. So every September, when the nation remembers, it's not just Biko's death that we recall. It is the question that haunts the corridors of power. What happens when the oppressed no longer hates themselves? In the great spirit of Bantu Biko, I come before you and say, we will struggle and we will continue to struggle. However, the goal is to have a more humane face of our people. Aluta continue. Siyabulela Tatu Biko, kosibekela ubomi bakho. Uze thina sikwazi ukuphila uhlobo siphila ngalo.
Even if telling it kills, we must tell it. It is the telling of uncomfortable truths that killed Biko. It is his courage to speak what's unspoken that killed him. And when he took his last breath, he offered us his spirit of courage. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the black majority that lives on the margins of the human condition to speak it. We owe it to Biko, the black prophet, the Messiah, the intellectual torchbearer, the lover of black life. We owe it to Andrew Zondo. We owe it to Solomon Mahlang. We owe it to Chris Hani. We owe it to everybody who did what we all in this room fear doing, dying for the truth. We owe it to Shaka Kasenza Ngakona. We owe it to Hinza. We owe it to Pambata Gamanginza. We owe it to all the heroes. Most importantly, we owe it to God and our children that we spent 31 years since 1994 betraying. Even if we are able to face the chilly winds of adversity and persecution for telling it, it has to be told. When Biko, the young black prophet of true liberation of mind, the intellectual torchbearer, as I said, the cross-bearer for the black lives, for the black race, took his last breath, he breathed into us the spirit of pride, black pride, courage, and self-love as the prerequisites for total liberation. Biko, like Christ, was the radiant light, revealing to us the profundity of sacrificing our minds to the colonizer and seeing ourselves through the eyes of people that despise us.